Hey, so in this video, we are going to learn about the map function in Python. Map is basically an inbuilt function in Python. You can find it in Python documentation. So this is the definition in Python official documentation about map function. Let's first see the simpler definition. So it states that map function returns a map object. Okay, let's break this definition down line by line. So map function returns a map object, which is an iterator. This map object is an iterator. This is a next keyword, and this which is an iterator of the results after applying the given function. After applying the given function to each item of the given iterable. To each item of the given iterable. So what is an iterable? Iterable is simply an object which contains a number of items like list, tuple, set, dictionary is an iterable. Each item of an iterable, it's each item of an iterable. For example, if a list contains 1, 2, 1, 3, 45 and 12. So each of these items are the items of this iterable applied to the given function. Applied to the given function. So if there is a function which takes an input n, so it applies all of these functions, all of these items of any iterable like this list here, or it could be a tuple like this, like this, each item of this iterable, and it applies to that given function, for example a square root function, and it returns a map object, simply an object of type map, which is an iterator in nature. And iterator in nature, again, it means where we can do a for loop, and we can do some operation in each item of that iterator. So simple definition. Let's see what the official documentation has to say about map. The signature is map. First argument is a function. The function which will be applied on each item of this iterable. And the second argument is iterable, obviously. And the third item, suppose, is an iterable again. So suppose this function takes two arguments, n and x, and it multiplies n times x and returns the output. So first item it is getting from the iterable 1, but what about the second item? So the second item it gets from iterable 2, which is passed next, or n number of arguments, n number of iterables. Now your question might be, suppose list 1 is having 5 items and this is having 8 items, what happens next? So we know that this function does n times x, so iterable 1 item into iterable 2 item. But what for the rest 3 items? It simply ignores them. So the definition states returns an iterator that applies function to every item of the iterable, yielding the result. If additional iterable argument are passed, function must take that many number of arguments, which we have just discussed, to the items of all iterables in parallel with multiple iterable. The iterator stops when the shortest iterable is exhausted, for, as we discussed, for cases where the function inputs are already arranged into argument tuple. See itertools.starmap. You can read it for your reference. All right, let's create our idle. I have already created a new file called map_listen. So let's create our iterable 1. I'm gonna call it list of numbers, which is a list, by the way, and it should be having some numbers. So 6 numbers are there. Let's create a function. This function is going to square a number which is passed to it, square num oops, which takes num, which is of type int. It returns an int, yep, and it simply returns the square of that number. Oops. Yes. Let's see if this how well this function is performing. So we're gonna pass 12, print, and let's run this. So it is returning 144 as expected. Now we need to demonstrate the map function here instead of just printing and this function with this single output. We're gonna write map, and the first item, which is the function itself, square num. Second item is the iterable, right? And this will apply this function to each item of this iterable, and let's store it into a variable called mapped squares. Yep. And last but not the least, print the mapped squares and see what output it gives us. It looks fine. Yes, let's run this. So I was expecting that it would print a list like this of all the numbers which are mapped together, but no, it printed this statement called map object at this thing. What is it? So this is just an object. This is a map object at this memory location. This is the address of the memory location where it is allocated. So it is of type iterable, as we discussed. So how do I access all the new squared items, squared numbers which we have created inside this mapped object? Simple. Since it is an iterator, how to see all the elements is by using a for loop. For I in mapped squares, print I. Let's run this. So as expected, square root of each item here is shown. Now we can simply convert it to a list if we want to do some list operations inside this map object, inside all the elements of this map object. We don't read this for loop. So now our mapped squares is simply a list. Let's print this. Let's run this. So now it's a list. Now for these kind of simpler functions, we generally do not use inside map. We use map for simple functions, but for these simple functions, as discussed in the previous video, we do not need to create a new full function. Instead of this full function, I'm going to create a simple lambda function here, lambda expression here. Lambda of n, which returns n squared. Yep. And it will do the same thing. Let's see. Let's test. Yep, it is doing the same thing. Now let's come to this case where we are passing another iterable to this map, and we're going to perform this operation where we are going to do item of the first iterable times the item of the second iterable. Let's create the second iterable. This time I'm going to create not a list but a tuple of numbers. And how to create a tuple? Easy, inside a parenthesis. 45, 12, this thing, yep, yep, yep. As you can see, the number of items in the iterable 2 is more than the number of items in the iterable 1. Let's do one thing. And first, we will not create this tuple. We will not create this iterable 2. And without creating this iterable 2, let's create two arguments inside this lambda and do the same operation which we were talking about, n times x, and pass only a single iterator. And this function takes two arguments and we are passing only single iterable. Let's see what error it throws. It says a lambda error, type error, lambda, missing one argument, one positional argument x. Yep. So the missing positional argument x is going to be supplied from this another iterable called tuple numbers. Now it looks fine, right? Let's run this and see the list. And another thing to notice, this is also having 6 items. The iterable 2 is not having 6 items, it is having more than 6 items. How many items does it have? This 6. This is having 9 items. So the last 3 items it has simply ignored. So this is the map function, and here we conclude our video. If you have any doubts, you can post them in the comments, and in the next videos we are going to discuss